Hi, I'm Jane Davies, and in this video, I want to share some of my process, the ways I kind of build up complexity and then paint over and collage over to simplify. I think we all come to a point in some of our pieces where it looks just too busy. There's too much going on, but we're a little afraid to cover over things that we like or things that we think might work. And I think my process generally addresses that pretty head on. So I hope this is helpful to you when you get to that point in your pieces. Here's the piece I'm working on for this demo. This is a very early stage. There I've added a little bit of veiling, and now I'm just adding more elements. I'm working on a 16 by 20 wood panel. And I'm using matte medium for collage, and my paints are all acrylics. Had mostly squares and rectangles, so I'm adding this kind of odd shape cut out from a gel print, I think. And now adding this flower shape. So I'm getting a lot of different shapes and values in here. So I've got a few different shapes and patterns. There's a little bit of layering that you can see that creates texture and transparency and depth. So I start to paint over some areas to try to simplify so I can see more clearly. But then I decide I am going to lift that paint, which creates more depth and texture. And here I'm taking that paint that I lifted with the brayer and adding it somewhere else, and that creates another area of depth, kind of a veil over the elements underneath. So I'm actually adding to the complexity of this rather than simplifying. And here I'm adding yet another layer using a transparent paint. And I'm going to lift that again with the newsprint. So here I'm adding layers. I meant to start painting over, but I ended up adding layers. It goes back and forth. So after those layers are dry, here I actually am going in to kind of block out areas, paint over things in opaque or almost opaque white to simplify and see what is there. Painting over some things makes other things more visible. So this is a way to play with that. So it's not even, it's barely at a beginning. So I'm not like trying to make it work or trying to finish any part of it. I'm just seeing what happens. Like, what are the shapes and the other elements that I want to work with in this piece. And now I'm back to adding more complexity. Here I'm adding some really distinct shapes, these house and barn shapes, roof shapes, including positive and negative shapes. And adding some flat opaque color in that yellow and some textured blue, using kind of a dry brush. Adding a blue element up here on the right. And then changing it to a little greener, darker value. So I'm really playing with the contrasts between depth and transparency versus flat, opaque areas, and also kind of pattern and texture against those flat and opaque areas. It's the flat, opaque areas, especially in the lighter, more neutral values, that are going to simplify the piece. They're going to make the more textured, layered, patterned areas really stand out a lot more. So in order to have the beautiful texture and depth, I think it's important to have the flat, opaque areas to really contrast against that. And notice how these flat, light pink areas make the surrounding areas stand out. Here I'm just adding in little bits of very dark value to contrast with the mostly mid value and light values. Painting over that light gray with a darker value. And flattening out that area around the ladder using a flat, opaque, very light gray. So it's a process of kind of going back and forth between building up complexity and knocking it back, and finding the right balance between the two to make your visual statement.